night shift changes the way you hear things. During the day, sounds blend together. Voices, footsteps, television's murmuring in the background. At night, everything separates. Every creak has its own meaning. Every shadow feels intentional. That's how I knew something was wrong with the rocking chair. I worked as a night caregiver in a private home for elderly residents. Nothing fancy. Long corridors, muted lights, rooms that smelled faintly of disinfectant and old fabric. The kind of place where time slows down on purpose. Where people are kept comfortable, quiet, and mostly asleep. Mostly. There was a rocking chair at the end of the west corridor. Old wood, hand-carved arms. The kind of chair you don't throw away because it's always been there. No one used it anymore. The residents who once liked it had either been moved to full care rooms, or were no longer with us. Still, it stayed. And at night, it creaked. At first, I explained it away. Old buildings breathe. Wood expands and contracts. Air pressure shifts. I'd worked enough night shifts to know better than to panic over normal sounds. But this wasn't random. The creak always came in rhythm. Back, pause, forward, pause, like someone rocking. Slowly, patiently. The first time I noticed it, I was making my routine rounds. Checking doors, adjusting blankets, noting breathing patterns. When I passed the west corridor, the sound stopped. Completely. That should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like being noticed. The second night, it happened again. Same corridor. Same rhythm. This time, I stopped at the intersection instead of walking past. I stood still, holding my clipboard tighter than necessary. The creaking continued. I leaned out just enough to see the chair. It was moving. Not much, just a few centimeters back and forth. Gentle. Controlled. As if someone was sitting perfectly still, letting gravity do the work. The corridor was empty. No airflow. No open windows. No vents nearby. I waited for it to stop. Didn't. After a full minute, I told myself I was being ridiculous. I stepped forward, my shoes barely making a sound on the linoleum. The chair slowed. One final creak. Then it stopped completely. That pattern repeated over the next week. Always between 2 o'clock and 3 a.m. Always when the building was at its quietest. Always stopping the moment I came too close. I didn't tell anyone. You don't bring this kind of thing up in places like that. Best case, they laugh. Worst case, they start watching you differently. Then came the night I saw it move too much. I was finishing paperwork at the nurse's station when the creaking started again. Louder than before. Faster. The pauses between movements were shorter, impatient. I looked at the clock. 2:17 a.m. I stood up immediately. As I turned into the west corridor, I could already see it from a distance. The rocking chair wasn't gently swaying anymore. It was rocking hard. The front legs lifted slightly off the floor with each forward motion. The sound echoed down the hallway, sharp and dry, like bones rubbing together. And then the light above it flickered. Once, twice. I stopped walking. Every instinct told me not to get closer. But standing there, watching it move on its own, felt worse. Like letting something finish without supervision. I took another step. The light dimmed. Not off, just weaker. Like someone turning a dial slowly. The chair rocked harder. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. The movement wasn't symmetrical. It leaned slightly to one side, as if adjusting to weight, as if someone was shifting in the seat. I told myself it was stress, lack of sleep, the job doing what it always does, blurring lines that should stay sharp. Then I heard it. Not a voice, a breath, low, close, right where the chair should have been empty. And the moment I stepped closer, the corridor light went out completely. When the lights came back on, the chair was still. Not gently, not slowly, perfectly. It stood exactly in the center of its space, both runners flat on the floor, as if it had never moved at all. I didn't touch it. I didn't write anything down either. That was the first rule I broke, the unspoken one. If you document something, it becomes real. If it becomes real, someone asks questions. And questions in places like that don't end with answers. They end with evaluations. Instead, I stood there longer than I should have, staring at the chair, waiting for my heart rate to slow down. Nothing happened.
No creaking.
No movement.
No breath.
Just a chair. I finished the rest of my shift on autopilot. Checked doors. Logged vitals. Smiled at cameras. By the time morning staff arrived, I had almost convinced myself that exhaustion had played a trick on me. Almost. The next night I came in prepared. I arrived early. Walked the west corridor before my shift officially started. I checked for loose boards, airflow, uneven flooring. I pressed down on the chair's arms, rocked it myself, memorized the sound. The creak it made under my weight was wrong. Too sharp, too loud, nothing like what I'd been hearing at night. That bothered me more than the movement ever had. At 1:50 a.m., I placed a folded piece of paper under one runner. A stupid trick. Childish, maybe, but if the chair moved, the paper would shift. At 2:05, I stood at the nurse's station, pretending to update logs. At 2:16, the creaking began. Same rhythm. Back, pause, forward. I didn't move. 2:18, the sound changed. Not faster. Heavier. Like the chair had sunk slightly into the floor. I walked toward the corridor, slow enough to hear every step of my own body. When I turned the corner, the chair was rocking again. The paper was gone. Not crumpled. Not pushed aside. Gone. I stood there long enough to feel the air settle around me. The light above the chair stayed steady this time.
No flique.
No dimming. Almost cooperative. I checked the floor. Nothing. Then I noticed the smell. Warm fabric. Dust. And something else, faint, metallic, like skin after holding cold metal too long. I backed away. That night, I started writing everything down. Not officially. Not in the system. On my phone. Timestamped. Objective language. No adjectives that could be questioned. 2:16 a.m. Sound observed. 2:18 a.m. Chair movement visible. 2:19 a.m. Foreign odor present. 2:20 a.m. Object under runner missing. Seeing it written like that should have helped. Didn't. Because once I started paying attention, the building started responding. Doors I hadn't opened were unlocked. Rooms I had checked were somehow disturbed. A blanket folded differently. A bedside cup rotated just enough to be noticeable, but not enough to prove anything. The chair stayed quiet for 3 nights after that. No sound. No movement. That silence was worse. On the 4th night, I passed the west corridor and froze. The rocking chair was angled toward the wall. I knew it wasn't like that before. Not because I remembered clearly, but because I remembered not remembering. That's when I realized the most unsettling part. I couldn't trust what I hadn't noticed anymore. I adjusted the chair back into place. Carefully. Precisely. I stood there afterward, hands hovering in the air, trying to feel whether something was watching me correct a mistake I wasn't supposed to see. When I stepped away, I felt lighter. Too light. Like something had been left behind. Back at the station, I checked my phone. There was a new note. Timestamped 2:14 a.m. I hadn't written it. The text was simple. It rocks better when you don't look. After that note appeared on my phone, I stopped trusting time. Not in the poetic sense. Not time feels strange at night. I mean literally. I started checking clocks compulsively. Wall clocks, wristwatch, system time on the workstation computer. My phone. I compared them the way people check mirrors after a near accident, making sure their face is still there. Everything matched. Too perfectly. The chair didn't move for the rest of that shift.
No creaking. No sounds.
Just silence heavy enough to feel intentional. I told myself the note had to be a mistake. A delayed draft. Sleep-deprived muscle memory. Anything that didn't involve the idea that I was interacting with something without being aware of it. But the next morning, I woke up with a soreness in my forearms. The kind you get after holding weight for too long. I hadn't lifted anything the night before. The second week is when patterns started forming. Not dramatic ones. Subtle. Administrative. Residents on the West Wing began requesting room changes. Not complaints, just quiet requests to be moved away from the corridor. One said she couldn't sleep because of movement in the air. Another mentioned the smell. The same smell I had noticed. Warm fabric. Dust. Something metallic. I checked their charts. No history of hallucinations. No medication changes. I mentioned it casually to the day supervisor. Not the chair. Just the corridor. She paused longer than necessary before answering. Old buildings settle, she said. Try to keep the lights on. She didn't look at me when she said it. That night, I didn't go near the chair. I avoided the west corridor entirely. Took longer routes. Found excuses to stay visible on camera. I even sat with a resident longer than necessary just to feel another person breathing in the same space. At 2:11 a.m., the creaking started anyway. Not close. Distant. Muffled. Like it was happening behind a closed door. Except the west corridor had no doors. I stayed seated. At 2:14 a.m., my phone vibrated. No sound. Just a vibration against the desk. Another note. You're holding it wrong. I didn't read it twice. I locked the screen immediately and stood up so fast my chair rolled backward. That's when I noticed my hands. My fingers were curled inward, palms angled slightly forward, like they had been gripping something round, something with arms. I flexed them until it hurt. The creaking stopped. I didn't sleep after that shift. I didn't even lie down. I sat on the edge of my bed, shoes still on, watching the sun rise through the blinds like it was a threat instead of relief. I started reviewing security footage. Not officially. I didn't want logs. I didn't want reports. I used my own phone, recording short clips of the monitors when no one was watching. The west corridor camera never showed the chair moving. Never. But it showed something else. At exactly 2:14 a.m. on 3 different nights, my shadow entered the frame. Not my body. Just the shadow. Longer than it should have been. Arms extended farther than my own could reach. Standing where the chair was. Then every time the shadow bent. As if sitting. There was no corresponding movement from me on other cameras. I was always somewhere else. Charting. Sitting. Standing still. I stopped checking footage after that. Because if I kept looking, eventually I would find the moment where the shadow stood up again. And I wasn't ready to see where it went. That night, I walked the west corridor on purpose. Slow. Controlled. Lights fully on. The chair was there. Facing forward. Centered. Waiting in the way inanimate objects never do. I stood in front of it and said nothing. The chair didn't move. But the smell came back. Stronger. And beneath it something else. Faint. Familiar. Like my own skin after a long shift. I stepped back. The chair creaked once. Just once. And I understood something then, with a clarity that scared me more than the chair ever had. It wasn't moving on its own. It was waiting for me to finish what I had already started. The incident happened on a Tuesday. Nothing dramatic.
No screaming. No alarms.
That's what made it worse. At 3:37 a.m., a resident from room 214 was found on the floor beside her bed. No injuries.
No confusión.
Just sitting there, calm, as if she had chosen the spot deliberately. When I helped her up, she looked at me and asked a single question. Why did you leave me in the chair? I told her she must have been dreaming. She nodded too quickly. Then why does my back hurt like I've been sitting all night? I checked her room.
No chair. No rocker.
Just the bed, the nightstand, and the empty space near the window where nothing had ever been placed. I documented it as a fall risk incident. Standard procedure. Neutral language.
No speculation.
But later that morning, the day supervisor called me into her office. She didn't ask me to sit. She just slid a printed report across the desk. It was my incident log, with a handwritten note in the margin. Pattern forming. She finally looked up at me then. You've been spending a lot of time in the west corridor, she said. I told her that was part of my route. She nodded again the same way the resident had. Too quickly. Do you remember why the chair is there? She asked. I said no. She sighed, stood up, and opened a filing cabinet I hadn't noticed before. From the bottom drawer, she pulled out a thin folder. Old. Yellowed. Not digitized. She placed it on the desk between us. Inside was a single incident report from 11 years ago. Night shift. Caregiver. Male. Collapsed during rounds. Cause of death. Cardiac arrest. Location, West Corridor. Time, 2:14 a.m. There was an attached note. Witnesses reported the rocking chair continued moving after the body was removed. I felt cold move through me. Not over my skin, but underneath it. They left the chair? I asked. No, she said. They put it back. I looked at her. Why? She hesitated. Because when they removed it, she said slowly, staff started sitting in the corridor. That night I tried to call in sick. My hands hovered over the phone for a long time, but the thought of explaining why felt heavier than just going in. At 2:05 a.m., I stood at the entrance of the West Corridor again. The lights flickered, not off, not on. Just unstable enough to make depth unreliable. The chair was already moving. Slow. Controlled. Not empty. I didn't see anyone in it. But my body reacted as if I did. My breathing adjusted. My shoulders relaxed. My hands lowered naturally, as if resting on armrests that weren't there. The creaking matched my pulse. I realized then something I hadn't allowed myself to think before. The chair wasn't for the residents. It wasn't even for the dead caregiver. It was for whoever stayed too long. Whoever learned the route. Whoever knew the smell of the building at night. Whoever stopped questioning the silence. My phone vibrated. No new note. Just an open draft. Cursor blinking. Waiting. I didn't type. I didn't move. And somewhere behind me, very close, something exhaled. Not into my ear, but into the space where my shadow should have been. The chair slowed, as if it was making room. I don't remember sitting down. That's the first thing I had to accept. One moment, I was standing in the West Corridor, staring at a chair that wasn't supposed to matter. The next, the floor felt farther away than it should have. My knees didn't bend. They gave permission. The creaking changed. Not louder. Closer. Like it was coming from inside my chest. I looked down. My hands were resting exactly where armrests would be. My fingers curled slightly, relaxed, practiced, as if they'd done this before. The hallway lights steadied. Not brighter, just settled. The chair rocked once, twice. I tried to stand. My body didn't resist. It simply didn't respond. That was when I understood the worst part. Nothing was forcing me. There was no pressure, no grip, no invisible hands. The chair didn't hold people. It waited until they stopped holding themselves. A sound came from the nurse station radio. Static at first. Then a voice. My voice. West Corridor secure. Resident checks complete. I hadn't spoken. The radio answered itself. A camera light blinked above the exit sign. I looked toward it, and for the first time I saw what it saw. The footage wouldn't show a chair. It never did. Just a caregiver standing in the corridor. Still. Perfect posture. Head slightly tilted, listening. That's why the logs never flagged anything unusual. No missing staff. No unexplained movement. Just a night worker who stopped pacing. Who stayed in one place longer than average. Who eventually stopped showing up on payroll. Not because they disappeared, but because their position was quietly reassigned. I don't know how long I sat there. Time didn't stretch. It thinned. At some point, the rocking slowed. My breathing synced with it. Inhale. Creak. Exhale. Creak. I felt something behind my eyes. Not memories, but space. Room for silence. Room for nothing. That's when I heard footsteps. Real ones. Approaching. A new hire. Young. First walker. Still carrying sound with them. The chair shifted. Just slightly. I felt it before it happened. The urge. Not to speak. Not to warn. But to make room. The footsteps stopped. A pause. A breath held too long. Hello? The voice called. I tried to scream. What came out was a gentle exhale. The same sound I'd heard earlier. The lights flickered. The corridor settled. And somewhere, deep inside me, a thought formed, quiet and complete. I understand now why they never removed the chair. because empty spaces invite movement. But something that already feels occupied only needs patience. The morning shift found me standing in the west corridor, hands relaxed at my sides, vitals normal, responsive. I told them I must have dozed off. They believed me. They always do. The chair still creaks at night. They say it's old wood. They say it's air pressure. They say it's nothing. I don't correct them, because some nights, when the corridor is quiet and the building breathes evenly, I feel the chair rocking, and I know it's not empty.